Okay, so if you can please tell me, how do you identify?
Sure. I identify as a Caucasian, straight, or hetero, uh, all I want to say is heteronormative, heterosexual, cis man.
Okay. How long have you known that you've been your current identity?
Um, I think it has sort of been a progression as I have discovered that there were alternatives. It was sort of like, oh, I guess I do have to think about like what I am, but I've sort of always felt as though the gender and sexuality that were sort of assumed for me at birth have lined up with my feelings. So, you know, as a kid, they called me a boy. That made sense to me. When I found out that people were gay, it made sense to me. And then I was like, oh, I'm not that, but there are people who are, and you know, that's fine. And then as I encountered trans and non-binary people, I, it was one of those things where the community that I grew up in, there was not a lot of out people in terms of either sexuality or gender fluidity. So it was something that I was coming to a little bit later on in life. Um, and so I think that as I encountered each of those sort of other identities, it gave me a moment to think like, okay, what is mine? And realize and coming to understand that I was sort of what I had already been assigned.
I see. W- Um, Around more or less what age did you start becoming more aware of other identities and sexualities around you?
Sure. I think I was probably 9 or 10 when understood that people were gay, that there were people of the same sex attracted to each other. And then I think it was high school when I first became aware that there were people I was in community with who were transgendered. I played in a band with some folks who were like out of college, who were sort of from the same town that I was in, and sort of through that social group, um, there was somebody that I was acquaintances with who I found out was transgendered, but I didn't have like a personal relationship with them. They didn't tell me about it. It was something that I heard kind of secondhand. So I think that probably it was high school when I solidified for myself that I was cisgendered. Though I don't think that I knew that word. I don't think I knew the term cisgendered at that point.
Mhm.
Um, and and that I was straight, and that sort of all of those identities were pretty solid. In college, I did a little bit of experimenting. There were some guys that I kissed at parties, but it always felt performative or uh, very tentative. It didn't feel like it was coming from a place of like I really want to explore my identity. It was sort of more of a sure, let's do this, and
Mhm.
then not really connecting with the experience of kissing another man.
I see.
Yeah,
If if you don't mind elaborating on this, how would you define your sexuality?
sure. I would say that I am attracted to female identified people. Um, and I think that, if you'd asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I might have said that I was attracted to cis women, but I have sort of like since encountered enough femme presenting people who were not cis women, but who that I found myself attracted to, that I realized like, oh, I have to expand sort of what my assumption was. And uh, so I think I don't think that I am attracted to masculine presenting people. Um, and I don't think that I am. I think that in a sexual experience, I don't know that I would. Well, to be frankly honest, I have been with my partner for 15 years, 15 years now.
Mm.
So we started dating in 2011, when we were still in college. And so all of these, the sort of understanding of that there are trans and non-binary people that I am attracted to have happened outside of that. And I don't mean like serious feelings of attraction, but just recognizing them as being attractive. Um, and so it has all been pretty theoretical, because me and my partner are in a monogamous relationship.
Mhm.
So I wasn't, there wasn't a lot of exploring going on, but that I recognized that, but I did recognize that there were, um, femme presenting people that I was attracted to. Yeah,
Can you define femme presenting to me as you see it?
sure. Well, yeah, this gets into sort of an interest, not sorry, the 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 language is really tricky, because I think, um, the words are just so narrow. They
Mm.
don't really fully communicate what we are sort of feeling, and what's going on internally, which is I think a lot of me hedging while I try to figure out a better answer for you.
Mm.
Um, I think when I say femme presenting, I do mean sort of the, um, traditionally cisgendered presentation of femininity, which is rooted in kind of Western definitions of beauty. So longer hair, um, uh, gosh, not even. Why did I choose hair? Because short hair is also very feminine. I think this is your question is sort of showing me that I have not put a lot of thought into the definitions that I have sort of assumed for these things.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think I would say that the best definition I can give you at this point, without sort of taking more time and digging a little bit deeper, would be, people who present in the stereotypes of cisgendered women. Uh, yeah, that feels as specific as I feel like I can go before I'm excluding, unfortunately.
I appreciate that. Um, Interesting. Your response actually makes me want to know more in depth
Mhm. Yeah,
as to
absolutely.
the nature of your attraction uh, to whom you find attractive. I guess my next question would be: are you able to identify um, someone who is not non-binary based on looking at them?
No, no. I don't think that um, looking at someone, it's possible to um, determine their um, whether they are trans or non-binary or cisgendered. I don't think it's a visible thing, which I think is maybe what I was getting at is that there are people who I have been like raised to assume we're cisgendered, and those kinds of assumptions are okay. Let me. This is really fascinating. Uh, thank you. Um,
Thank you.
uh, I think that I was raised with the I was raised in a world where primarily there was a gender binary. There were women and there were men.
Mhm.
And I think that as I was growing up and as I was developing my sexuality, it was pretty much within that context. Um, and so I considered myself attracted to women. And uh, as I have as I've left the community that I was raised in, and moved to places like New York City and Los Angeles, and encountered people who have shown me that there is no gender binary. Um, I have started to understand like the people that I'm attracted to differently, but because I'm in a monogamous relationship, I haven't had to like dig too deep into sort of the specifics of things. Um, and I think part of that has been learning that like you do not know how anybody identifies, and you don't know, and I even the term identify is not really like sufficient, because it's not how someone identifies, it's who they are. You don't know who people are. You don't know their gender um, just by looking at them. Um, and so I think sorry. It's just
No.
I feel like I'm talking myself in a circle, and I'm really not getting you any closer to what you have asked me. Um, and so I think um, Yeah, this is really, really, really fascinating, really interesting, Dorian.
Yeah,
Thank
I appreciate your responses and you taking the time to think them over. I really, really do. It does sound though like you do know what you find, who you find attractive in life.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So yeah, so if I were to ask you to identify someone, just let's say in a crowd of people, and there's someone that you would find attractive, I could ask you to not like very obviously point at them, but
Yeah.
to describe someone in a crowd, and you would be able to pick that person out.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so you mentioned at one point in your ongoing awareness of other identities and other sexualities, and I appreciate at one point you did make the differentiation between the two. That you mentioned you knew someone who identified as trans
Mhm.
in high school, I believe it was that you said.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you would you happen to remember what their sexuality was?
I don't.
Okay.
I think they might have been uh straight. They were a man, and I
Okay.
believe they dated women.
I see.
Or yeah,
Okay. Can you identify? Actually, can you define to me what straight is?
yeah. I mean, no. Yes, yes, and no. I mean, they're like, there are. I think one of the things that is fascinating, not, I don't mean for it to be so intellectual, but sorry, I also haven't eaten lunch yet, so I'm a little bit worried that my brain is just like not processing information.
No, it's fine.
Um, I mean, like, I could give you the definition of straight that like I was raised with, which is like men who are attracted to women, women who are attracted to men.
I'm interested in hearing your definition of how, as you identify today as straight, how would you define straight for yourself?
Sure. I would say that straight for myself is I am primarily attracted to cisgendered women. Um, but there are people who exist sort of on the gender spectrum who I perceive as presenting like cisgendered women who I find myself attracted to. And I guess that's maybe one of the things that I'm struggling, which is that like there's my perception of a person, which is absolutely not their identity, and who I might not, I like after the fact, I will learn what their identity is. Um, and that generally doesn't change sort of my feelings of attraction towards them. Um, so, I am straight in the sense that like the group of people that I'm primarily attracted to are cisgendered women, but that is like not a hard and fast rule in that there are other people who identify outside of that group that I have also found myself attracted to.
I see. And you would define that as straight.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it is like on the queer spectrum, I guess, in the sense that like it's if you know at the if and I don't mean to put these two identities in opposition so much, in that like if like uh, yeah, Yeah, I that is sort of what I think straight is. I every time I want to like branch out and sort of define other things, I feel like I don't want to narrow other people's experiences. Like, I don't know. Because I have family members who I know like they would be like what they would tell you is that like straight, I'm only attracted to women and it's like nothing else.
Hmm.
Um and so like that is potentially like one end of the spectrum, and that there is another end of a spectrum, which is people who are only attracted to people of the same gender as themselves, which would be like two cis. Well, yeah, yeah.
Are you in a straight relationship now?
I would say so because I think me and my partner both identify as straight.
I see. Okay. Um, does your partner identify as a cis woman?
Yes.
Okay. In theory, if tomorrow, let's say, she would want to identify as non binary
Mhm.
and would want you to refer to them as non binary using they them pronouns, but their appearance would be mostly the same, would this change your attraction to them?
No.
Okay. So is it safe to say that you are attracted to not just cis women?
Yes.
And you would still identify that as straight?
I think I would identify it within the like the fuzzy outlines of straightness. That like if straightness is a uh mhm. Yeah. Uh I guess I think of myself, if if sexuality is a spectrum, is a set of feelings that are specific to each person, but that are kind of, we use certain words to define what the different points on that spectrum are. I would say I'm towards the straight end of that spectrum,
Hmm.
but not, all the way on the Kinsey scale or whatever sort of academic metric somebody could use.
You mentioned at one point um, your words, queer spectrum,
Mhm.
and you mentioned straightness within the queer spectrum. Do you believe that the sexuality known as straight is part of the queer spectrum?
Um, I th- uh, I think there's certain I would say that they're certainly in conversation with each other. I think they are um I th yeah, I don't know if, yes, I would say that they are. I don't, well, this is, I think, where I one of the things I struggle with is that, like, as somebody who has does not feel like they've had a like a have not lived as sort of a queer person, I don't want to like sort of put in definitions and be like, well, yeah, obviously this goes in the queer spectrum. I just don't feel like I have the lived experience to sort of do that. But I think that there is a spectrum in which that like queer identities, straight identity, or not queer identities, but like queer sexuality, straight sexualities are balanced against each other, are sort of in conversation with each other, are a part of the same continuum. So in that way, yes, straightness is in the queer spectrum.
Hmm. I see. But you yourself would not identify within the queer spectrum.
Uh, I I mean, yes, I guess that I would.
You would.
Ye- But I yes, by which I mean that like I recognize and exist like how I am not totally in line with what traditional definitions of straight mean.
So you believe that there is flexibility in defining straight, that it's not just one specific definition, but rather
Mhm.
there is such a thing as a spectrum of straightness. Do you believe that to be the
I
case?
well, I think that this spectrum of straightness and this spectrum of queerness bleed into each other, and you sort of everybody sort of falls somewhere along that line to a certain extent. I think that when I think about sort of the identities that I identify myself as and identify myself with, I I think I recognize that I have had feelings of attractiveness to non-cisgendered women, and therefore my sexuality is sort of outside of the traditional definitions of straightness. But I, the way that I am perceived in the world, the way that I move through the world, it feels like the identity that fits best is sort of straight and cisgendered, which I think gets to sort of the point I was trying to make earlier about words because they sort of narrow what an experience is, uh, make these kinds of labels complicated and only somewhat useful.
I see. Do you ever find yourself being misunderstood because of your sexuality?
No, um, no. And I think part of that is that because it doesn't come up a lot. Like my sexuality is not something that I have to intimately communicate a lot with people out who are not my partner.
Mm-hmm. And this is among the circles that you tend to find comfort
Um, yes, I think amongst my social groups, people's sexuality is supported and discussed, but um, feels um, but mine specific within those communities feels kind of incidental to my greater personality. Maybe incidental is the wrong word. I mean, part of it is also that I'm like kind of a private person.
in. Mm-hmm.
It's not the kind of thing that I personally sort of bring up and discuss a lot. And I think part of it is also that I'm settled into a monogamous relationship in which like sort of that those um our sexuality is sort of each other at this point.
Hmm. I really appreciate your time. I know it's a lot to think about. It has been during this time that we've shared. Um, if I may make a comment,
Mhm.
it does seem, based on our conversation and you're elaborating on what your sexuality is, that there is always room for interpretation and certainly how we embody our own attraction to others and how we wish that sexuality to be represented. I can tell you, as someone whose sexuality and identity, separately and sometimes intertwined, have been points of marginalization for a very long time, I can tell you there is an extraordinary freedom that I feel in not having to have all the answers as to who I am and what I'm into.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that the comfort that I have found within myself is to answer these questions in a way of, well, right now I am attracted to blank. Right now I identify as blank, but that may change.
Mhm.
I understand in circles of cis heterosexual men, this may be a very rare conversation to have, and certainly not typical points of reflection. And it is fascinating to me that in a world that holds the cis hetero male standard as the one that we must all compare ourselves to, there is still so much shaky ground, if you will, as to
Mhm.
what that definition is and what that standard has been.
Mhm.
So, just a reflection to put out there, but
Thank
also enormous gratitude for your time and for your directness.
you.
And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing this space.
Mhm.
Um, by the way, if I may add, the idea of sharing space and holding space for others, as you have done for me and I have done for you, is very much a queer trait. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Uh, yeah. Dorian, I kind of want to have like this conversation for another hour with you. Um, but you know, I know I think neither of us have the ability to go on too much longer. But thank you for asking me these questions because they're not questions I've had to ask myself in a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I think, always useful to revisit them and to uh, check in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording, by the way.
Sure. Sure.
Um,